Welcome to Big Canoe. It's 5 o'clock.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the August 2020 board work session. I announced last month that I am not going to be a candidate for the president of the POA board in 2021. And as part of the transition into that, I've asked each of the three directors who are going to have terms that continue on into 2021 to lead a work session. Our governing documents say that I need to handle board meetings, but work sessions can be. So today I'm going to turn it over to Regis Felinski, and the next month I'll turn it over to Candy Robertson, and after that to Lou Stevenson. Excuse me, Lou, pardon me. With that said, Regis owns the agenda and is chairing the meeting, and Regis, it's all yours.
Okay, well, thank you, Bob, and good afternoon to Big Canoe. We've got quite a full agenda this afternoon, so we will get started immediately with our operations update from the General Manager, Scott Auer. And he is going to highlight a couple of topics in this update, one being the kind of what has now become, unfortunately, the traditional COVID update. And then he's also going to discuss what went wrong with the bocce courts and what kind of things we're going to do to prevent occurrences like these from happening in the future. So with that, Scott, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Regis, and hello to all the neighbors in Big Canoe. The COVID update, let's just talk about where we are at the moment. We ended up having 7 employees in total since we started way back in March. We've had 7 positive test results. You may recall at one point we talked about 10 employees having to leave work and have symptoms and that type of thing. 7 of those actually received positive tests. We've had another 12 employees, on the other hand, who have actually missed work with COVID type symptoms, but then tested negative through the whole process. So just to give everybody a little idea, it doesn't necessarily mean when someone's experiencing some, aches, pains, flu-like symptoms, we treat it as if it could legitimately be a COVID case. That person goes home, that person is in self-isolation. We ask for a test, and so far 7 people have tested positive and 12 people missed work, received some pay under the FMLA CARES Act, but ended up testing negative. So as you can imagine, that's part of the staffing problem that we're running into, because depending on where those folks are, that takes a good chunk out of some of the departments. So it's just part of our lives now, just something that we're dealing with on an ongoing basis. But it's part of why we can't always have all of our amenities running at full capacity. So we did make a change in policy this week. From the time that we implemented the mask directive, honestly, the biggest part that bothered me personally about what we were doing was the fact that I understood there were people who were medically not able to wear a mask, and they could no longer go to the fitness center to exercise. And that bothered me. So I started a crusade looking honestly all over the country at what many other states had implemented as far as very clear directives for their fitness centers, and also going into some of the National Fitness Center associations. Steve Panetta helped me with that. We looked at what Planet Fitness and LA Fitness were doing, and we're making a slight change to the policy, which I think will be very positive. So Steve has taken 5 pieces of cardio equipment, and we have moved that equipment into the racket court area. And those 5 pieces of equipment are 2 spin machines, 2 rowers, and 1 stepper. So not the most popular equipment, but still really good cardio equipment. We're maintaining 12-foot distancing between each of those pieces of equipment, not the 6 feet we have everywhere else, but 12 feet. So if you are medically cleared to say, I cannot wear a mask, and you have registered that on file with the fitness center, and it's easy to do. There's a binder. You just go into the fitness center, go to the main desk, medical clearance form. If you have that in place, then we are saying you can use that room without a mask, 12 feet apart, for your cardio workout. Everywhere else, same rules apply. You're 6 feet apart on the rest of the equipment. You're wearing a mask at all times. Many other states have done exactly that. I felt like that was a good compromise. Steve felt that was a good compromise. Checked with public safety. Everybody's pretty much on board with that plan. So that is effective now. We also added one more swim lane. So we now have 4 in the pool also. So I think this is still a very safe thing to do for us. And it only is for a subset of the population who is medically cleared for that type of thing. But I think it does help with probably the stickiest area that we had with our policy. Everything else is going, no one obviously is thrilled with what we have to do as a neighborhood now, but it's safer. Our number of test results is staying low. That's good. I was worried at one point that was going to continue to climb dramatically among our workforce. Looks like that has stabilized, so that's a good thing. And it's kind of business as usual beyond that. So that's the update on COVID for today. Any questions about that? And anyone on the board or anything before we go any further?
Nope.
Okay, great, thank you. So the next topic is bocce. And as that project was unwinding, I was like almost all of you, I was a property owner sitting and listening to the meetings and listening to what was happening, and then hearing about how things were not going well and how courts were in trouble. And so actually the very first week I was here, which is about 7 weeks ago now, I went out to the bocce court. I think that was one of the first things we did, and started to look at what happened, what went wrong, what do we need to do differently. About the same time, the board was also asking the Audit and Risk Committee to do an assessment and meet with the staff and look into what happened exactly. How did we get in this situation? And most importantly, what can we learn from the situation so we make sure it doesn't happen again? So I'd like to go through, we had a pretty in-depth meeting with Audit and Risk a few weeks ago with the board, but I want to go through exactly the main points for you. So a few things went wrong right from the very beginning. The first thing is there was never a written specification for what we're building. So the engineer in me hates that, because if you don't have it written down, I'm assuming somebody has a misunderstanding somewhere and we don't exactly know what we're building. So that was learning number one, is you have to have a written specification, and it needs to be signed off by your customers, who are the people that you're building the thing for in the first place. So that was kind of learning number one. Second big learning is the project timeline and the budget were set based on an understanding of what the spec was, but then the spec changed. So as we got into it, you might remember, again, as a property owner, I remember a board meeting where all of a sudden it changed. It was going to be on the basketball court. All of a sudden it wasn't going to be on the basketball court. It was going to be next to the basketball court. When that happened, the scope of work dramatically changed on the project. And the learning is we never went back and said, time out, spec has changed. That means the budget's probably going to change. It means the timeline is certainly going to change. And we need to go back through that and reassess everything before we just still blindly do our best job to hit, a date and a budget for a project that no longer exactly existed the way it did when the budget and timeline was set. So that was a big learning. If the scope changes, you got to go back and check everything again. Next thing I would say, we didn't get 3 competitive bids. There was a few reasons for that, but it should have happened. There should have been 3 competitive bids for the entire project, and that was a miss. There was actually 2, but we missed 1. That should have also happened. Next thing is, because originally the project was in the $50,000 to $100,000 range, it didn't at that time require finance approval. The ROI was not really done 100% correctly. Finance committee wasn't really involved in that process. Another miss, another opportunity to catch some mistakes before they become a big problem. So that's another learning. And probably the last big one is we were acting as the general contractor. I don't really want to usually be in the position of acting as the GC. So we're responsible for X, Y, and Z. This other vendor is responsible for another part of the project. Another vendor comes in, they're responsible for yet another part of the project. And so if something goes wrong, who's at fault exactly? And because we're the GC, it really limits our ability to hold a certain person accountable to say, that was specifically your issue. It was in your scope of work. It didn't work. I want to call a warranty claim, something of that nature. So probably the last thing is a culture. And we have a culture here, I think, of people trying to be overly helpful, to be, they want so badly to do the right thing for the community. And in trying to do the right thing, you may do the wrong thing. So, if a timeline got arbitrarily set and the staff is like, well, there's a lot of worries here, but we're going to give it the try. We're going to really try to get this done. That doesn't always serve as well. It's much, much better to lay out the spec, to lay out the schedule, to get the 3 bids, to lay out the timeline, to build the risk into it, to build the contingency into it, and manage it as a first-class project. And if that means the timeline's a little bit longer and it exceeds what somebody really hoped would happen, that's just the way it's going to be, because that's what the project requires, unless you go back and change the requirements. So again, it's an engineering process. That's the way you do major projects in an engineering world. It's not like we're going to try harder. So the Audit and Risk Committee identified that as a cultural thing, which I'm working with on my staff. Your heart's so in the right place, but it's like when your strength becomes your weakness. So don't try too hard and to get to say, well, okay, but really follow the process. So what do we do now? What do we do differently? Well, the first thing that happened is, partially because of everything that I'm talking about, the Finance Committee last year and Audit and Risk took on updating our policies and procedures, and all that was accomplished by November of 2019. So we updated and corrected policy and procedure 152, 152.1, 153, 153.1, and came up with a really nice Appendix A for 153.1. Makes it much easier for a new general manager coming in to be able to look at those policies and procedures and see clearly how we manage capital projects. There was a little bit of gray, sort of soft area there. That has already been corrected. So that's a great learning already done. Second thing I've said to my whole staff, I've been talking to long range planning about this a lot lately. We don't do anything without a written spec. So the first part of every single project is we identify who the customers are. We beat the spec to death. We make sure it's signed off and they know what they're getting. And then we go into the rest of the process of developing business cases and working with bids and working with contractors. Until that's done, nobody does any quotes about timelines or money. Second thing is, so what we've done with Bocce is we've written a spec. I asked to form, and Linda Powell did this for me, it's terrific. We formed a committee. So we have a committee of 5 Bocce principals, from the Bocce babes and the Bocce guys, who spend a lot of their time rolling balls out there. And they are going to be our steering committee through the spec process and through the bid process, and eventually signing off on completion of the project. So it's been great. We defined a spec on what we thought they had told us they wanted. We've had a few committee meetings and they're like, hey, wait, we have another, this would be better. Don't build that, but do this. All of those kind of discussions are happening on the front end of the project, not in the middle or the back end. It's kind of like building a house. You really want to get all that worked out with your architect before you get your builder involved, and then start giving them change orders. Builders love change orders because they make a fortune on them. So we're doing the change orders up front. So we have a committee in place. Next thing is finance committees involved right from the beginning. So we actually have built the business plan. We're taking it to finance next week. We're not even asking for approval yet because we honestly want them to kick the teeth out of it. We want them to look at that and say, what did we miss? Did we consider this cost? Did we allocate labor properly? You know, have we built in enough contingency based on your guys' experience? So we're getting finance involved right from the beginning because why wouldn't I? They're really smart people. I was on the finance committee. I like these guys. So I want their help in basically saying, do we have it right? Before we then will take it back to the finance committee. Once the spec is signed off, once we have a better idea on costs, we'll take it back, update the business case, and ask them then for their final approval per the policies and procedures that we talked about before. So we'll do that. Then we'll go get 3 competitive bids. Got to have 3 competitive bids. And the bids will be for the entire project, not pieces of the project. So I want to get out of being the general contractor. So we will hire somebody to design deliver a first-class bocce facility for a community that's worthy of Big Canoe. And they will manage that whole project. There'll be a warranty associated with it, and we'll be able to hold them accountable for meeting the specs. Last thing, of course, is after we get the bids, after finance has approved it, we will be bringing it in front of the board for their approval. That's what the policy and procedures does. That's why part of why the board's here. So they will give their blessing, thumbs up, thumbs down on the project. That'll be in a public session, a working session, and then a vote. So everybody will be able to see that. There'll be nothing happening off to the side. We don't work that way. And then we'll deliver a really great bocce facility. So if you ask me now how much that's going to cost or how long that's going to take, my answer is going to be, I don't know, because we haven't finished the spec yet. And so we're going to start giving those answers a little bit more until we've got the specs, until we've got the bids. We're just working through the process per the policies and procedures. So that's a big change. And whether we're talking about patios for the clubhouse, whether we're talking about chimneys renovations, whether we're talking about bocce courts, you're going to get really tired of hearing me say this, and my staff's probably already tired. Is like, this is how we run projects at Big Canoe. And I think it will go a long way to helping everybody feel a little more comfortable on what we're actually doing. And we'll build a track record of delivering what people want for the money that was originally approved. So that's kind of where we are, Regis.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that update, Scott. Are there any questions from the board? Okay, well, I do have one quick question for you, Scott. You mentioned you updated policy. We do have updated policies and procedures.
Yep.
At a lower level, at a working level, I'm used to dealing with work instructions or actually how you go about and take these steps in order to comply with the policies and procedures. Will we have written work instructions so that the guy or woman that takes on the next project can say, okay, well, this is how we're supposed to do this? And
yeah, it's an excellent question. As I moved into the office here, I found a old document from, I think it was 2004, that was a beautifully constructed flow chart on here's how we run projects in Big Canoe. And I had the exact same thought that we need to update that, because part of my goal is someday, hopefully, God willing, far in the future, when I leave this job, the next general manager is like, yeah, this is it. Here's the file. This is how we run projects here. They don't need to reinvent this process. So yes, short answer, absolutely. Good idea. I agree.
Scott, I have a question of the continuing involvement of the committee you put together, the bocce ball.
Right.
They're involved in writing the specification. What's their involvement going to be throughout the other phases of the project?
Yeah, so we wrote the charter so that they would continue to be involved through the bidding process to make sure they were comfortable that the bids we were receiving matched the spec. And then my goal was, we would then obviously manage the construction project. But if any questions are coming up during that process, if anything's not clear, The committee is involved in helping to steer that and also to be a liaison with the rest of the bocce amenity community. And then when we're done, I want to sign off from the committee saying, yes, we built exactly what we were given the specs for. And at that point, then we turn it back over to running as a first-class amenity, and we can get back to rolling balls, which right now is kind of hard to do because the courts aren't too level, as I found out the other day in my first bocce experience. So there you go.
Okay.
Scott,
Go
this
ahead.
is Wayne. One other point to consider. In some of the builds we've done, we couldn't get more than 2 bids.
Right.
So you've got to think your way through. In
It-
some areas, there's very limited capability, and
Yep.
we run into a lot of construction crews that rather work in Atlanta than come here, and they won't,
Yep.
or they overbid. So they've thrown themselves
Right.
out. So just keep
Yep.
that in mind. It's unfortunate, but
Yep.
I think our goal is the 3 bids. Doesn't always work.
And the good news, I agree. The good news is they actually thought that through in the policies and procedures. So it specifically addresses situations where you can't get 2 bids or more than 2 bids. And, just gives you guidelines on how to document that so that when you bring it forward to the board, it's clear that, in this case, we were only able to get 2, for example. So, but we will try our best to get 3. That'd be much better.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Scott. And that concludes the first section of the agenda for tonight, the operations update. So we will move on to the business section. And the first item there is budget guidance. Obviously, this is something the board needs to do. It needs to provide Scott and Jane and their team so that when the budget is finally produced in late October, November, the board is not surprised. They know what our goals and what our expectations are for the budget.
Join the meeting.
So with that in mind, we did go through a process where we solicited input from all board members, and there's a lot of consistency in one area, no assessment increase. Beyond that, it's kind of a mixed bag. At a very high level, there was a budget guidance, three specific steps. 1, no assessment increase. Routine CapEx is going to be equal to depreciation, and the income from operations needs to fund that depreciation, fund those capital expenditures. So that is kind of the model, the business model Big Canoe is operating under for some time now. And then finally, no reduction in services to property owners or diminishment of the property owner's experience. Obviously, you can cut pretty deeply into a budget if you start taking away things from the property owners. And that is not, we don't feel that that's an appropriate way to achieve these budget guidelines. So beyond that, there were some suggestions relative to zero-based budgeting, basing all budgeted expenses on multiple bids and other verifiable data. Again, no increases in assessments or annual amenity fees to cover operations. As far as capital, because you will be preparing a capital budget, it's probably pretty far along by now, but base estimates on realistic pricing verified by bids or other objective data. And then there's a suggestion relative to redistributing necessary capital expenditures for 21-22 to have a budget roughly equal to depreciation in each of those years. So a little flexibility with the CapEx equals depreciation. There's another suggestion for zero-based budgeting, and then there's a lot of other things that, to my mind, fit more into the next section, establishing goals and objectives, as opposed to budget guidance. And I guess the board can discuss this, but I'm talking about things like improve property owner satisfaction to 7.8 to 8.5. I don't really see that as budget guidance. I see that as a goal or objective that should be set for the general manager. So there were some other observations. The community looks tired as I drive through it. And I think that's something we talked about, not necessarily guidance, but an expectation that we do something about improving the visual appearance of our amenities, our common areas, so on and so forth. And I think that's pretty much it. I mean, there's a lot more input here, but I don't want to sit here and read all these emails. So if any of the board members think that there is something key that I left out that they want to emphasize as far as guidance is concerned, and then we can have a general discussion as to what is appropriate guidance and what is really kind of getting too far into your bailiwick and how you develop the budget. So any comments or input from any of the board members or prospective board or future board members? Amy, you're included on this as well. Okay, apparently not. So I will express my opinion on this. And I think the higher level we leave this, the better off we are. I think I would treat zero-based budgeting as a suggestion, a strong suggestion that we do this in order to achieve your budget goals. But at the end of the day, you're responsible for making sure that we generate sufficient operating income to fund our capital expenses, and we do it without assessment increases. And I think some of the other expectations, and we can probably summarize these as far as, for example, the comment about things that we think need attention, and that should be included or considered in the budget as it's being developed.
Regis, just one quick thing to add. We also need to cover, and I wrote that in my memo, that we've got to cover debt service kind of operations.
Right, yeah.
CapEx.
Right, debt service and lease payments. Yes,
Right.
Absolutely. So, Scott, any comments on this guidance, or again, from any board members, is there something that you feel that we should be providing as guidance that I haven't included in my summary there?
I think from my side, you've given me everything we need. It's incredibly helpful to have served on the finance committee and been part of this process on the other side last year. So, clearly I look at the world of, we need to fund our capital with our depreciation. We need to cover the debt service. We need to have some surplus left over after we have finished that for a rainy day or a contingency situation. And it's a really good year for us because I'm new on this side. Bobby Jones will be very, very involved in the budget process. We have 3 solid days booked with them next week, where we will be going through department by department. So my way of operating is always start from what's the goal of this department? What are we trying to do with public safety? I do think about things like the property owner survey that we just did and what the key areas were that were shortfalls. And as a property owner, I've said this, yes, we look tired, so those things are going to be in my mind as we build a zero-based budget. So long answer to, I think you've given us what we need. And obviously then the finance committee will be very involved in that once we beat it up with Bobby Jones. So I'm looking forward to the process. We really roll up our sleeves and get busy next week.
Okay, well, I think this is going to be extremely challenging to generate sufficient operating income to meet CapEx because of all the CapEx that we pushed out of this year into next year, that has got to be funded. But I'm sure you're aware of that, and you know, you will do your best and your team will do their best to accomplish that objective. Okay, well, if there aren't any more questions from the board, we will go into the board goals and objectives for 2021. And before I start that discussion, I would assume that the board has set its goals and objectives in previous years. And I guess I'd like a little bit of understanding as to how that was done. If, you know, Wayne or Lou can enlighten me and the rest of us as to what the process was.
Well, in part, Regis, we did a couple of things. One, we did the surveys. We had the outside vendor come in and look at everything we were doing. I guess it's been about 18 months. Ran a number of workshops with the community to ensure that we had some strong background information on what they thought was important. It varied a bit from people that have been here a long time and people that were brand new. Based on that, for this year's objectives, we selected really out of the top 6 or 7, we took 6 things that we thought were really important. A great deal of focus on the clubhouse and a couple of areas in there. We had the post office, and we also had the wellness center. We had some safety issues. So anytime we have a safety issue like we experienced at the back gate for maintenance on Steve Tate, we had to stop and say, sometimes safety takes over from now that we know it's a problem, we need to take some action on it. And we know that still exists. So it's something that the general manager and us have got to just be sure that we've either mitigated the risk or we've come up with a solution on. And then because we had the long range planning committee looking at it in considerable detail over a variety of items, I think we had about 21 objectives that had been, or areas that had been surfaced. You start a list of what's the best value added to the community. What can we do within a reasonable budget for the year that we're going into? And so that was part of the decision. And then we tried to make a few recommendations to look at. In my 2.5 years on the board, I think each year the board sat down and tried to prioritize based on input from both long-range planning and the finance committee. What's the art of the possible? Prioritize that based on the circumstances. So we also know that things change from time to time. So like the COVID-19 situation now has forced us to decide what kind of revenue we're going to generate. We're doing so well in some areas, and probably because of restrictions, not near as well as we'd like, though we certainly tailored it back. And I think each board, from my experience, has tried to pay close attention to what the community would desires and then try to determine, well, what can we afford to do? You notice that we didn't approve a $25 assessment until last year because we really needed some additional funds for capital. And it wasn't because we knew exactly what it was. We said, if we don't start generating some funds, we can't continue to make this work for us. And then there are other safety things that came along. You know, we have the road maintenance that has to occur every year, which is really operational. We also had to replace a lot of the bumpers that protect us from not going off the road. And it turns out we weren't operating the standard. They needed to be 3 feet high, and we were only 2. So those are all the new things that come along when you start to examine it. Kind of back to Scott's comments on, well, we need to carefully examine what the specifications are going to be, and are we in compliance if we're going to do it? And so that's been generally the approach. Lou, you may want to add something, but that's been the process.
I think you've generally covered all the primary bases. We really extensively rely on the participation from long range planning. They compiled the information from the residents voting as far as prioritizing. And then, like you said, as other conditions might pop up, then we have to address those immediately. But we did cue in on like 6 primary topics for discussion and projects that we wanted to, adopt or implement during that year, given that we had the funding to move forward. So I think Wayne's pretty much consistently covered it.
Okay, well, and that's very helpful. And I appreciate that. I don't think what I'm going to talk about is, it may add some structure to that process, but in many ways will be, again, this is my idea. I'm one of 6 board members, and I'm not saying this is what we should. I'm saying that, in my opinion, this is what we should do. But if the other board members don't agree with me, then of course it is a vote of the majority vote of the board. But in any event, I wanted to go through a kind of a process diagram. This is something that we used to do when I was working, and essentially you establish goals through a flow down process throughout the organization. And it starts with your vision statement. We used to call this process policy deployment, by the way, but that was just a one nomenclature. But in any event, it starts with our vision statement, which we all know is to be the preeminent private mountain community in the Southeast, and the rest. And then from that, there are 4 strategic objectives that were established in the strategic plan. 1, enhance the reputation of Big Canoe, become the employer of choice, be prudent stewards of POA assets, and preserve the character of Big Canoe. So those are the strategic objectives. That's what we've got to do to achieve our vision. And then the way I would look at this is that in 2021, we as a board have to establish objectives that we can accomplish to support these strategic objectives, the reputation, employer of choice, so on and so forth. And we as the board, not the GM, have the responsibility to accomplish these goals. So there were some of the things that, in terms of, like you were talking about, Wayne, the bumpers on the side of the roads, or the guardrails, or whatever we call them. That may be something that, that is more operational than the board should be operating at. And it could very well be at the next level, which are the management goals. These are the goals established by the management team, which would be, of course, Scott and Bobby Jones, and they would be agreed to by the board. That's where you get into things that, we would need to improve safety by doing this, and this, or we need to increase, the performance of the clubhouse, the satisfaction rating from 8.5 to 8.8 or whatever it was. And then once those are established, those goals are flowed down to the department heads, where they would establish individual department goals, and that the department heads would be held accountable for achievement of those goals in their annual review. So I know Bobby Jones has a management system that they operate called EOS, I think is what it was. We learned about it the other day. I haven't read the whole book. I did start it, but I haven't read the whole book, so I'm not sure how that would overlap with this. But I would like to think that there's the two don't policies wouldn't be butting heads or at conflict, that you'd be able to dovetail one into the other. So with that in mind, I gave some thought to what, and certainly we're not going to, this is a very important thing, and we're not going to establish this in a 15-minute session here now, but I think we can at least kick some ideas around. And one of my suggested board goals would be to develop a more robust process for the annual updates of the master plan, which would better serve the needs of the community. I think all the board members and Scott, understand some of the struggles we've had, and the long range planning has shared some of these struggles as well. And then the other, so I think that that's something we should focus on doing, accomplishing as a board to do next year. And another thing would be to review, revise, and simplify our governing documents. Again, that's something we talked about. I remember we talked about it during the orientation session when Candy, Bob, and I came onto the board as newbies. So again, I would think that would be an appropriate goal for next year. The one other thing, and going back to the flow chart, is the goals, our board goals and management goals have to be flowed down not only to our department heads, but to our committees. Finance, long-range planning, audit and risk, they all have to be aware of what these objectives are, because that may structure what some of the committee goals or how the committee is going to function that year. So I'll be quiet if anyone has any comments on the process, or if they want to suggest some goals that we can think about and then set up a session down the road. If the community has any input in terms of what they think the board should be focusing on next week, I think I would be very interested in soliciting those opinions and seeing if that would be appropriate to work into the board goals. So,
Well, Regis, I would add that there's a joint effort almost going on concurrently, which is, so let's just take safety for a minute. We get a briefing from the general manager on the key safety issues, some of which we may or may not know. And then we said, why don't you lay that in a priority that you think we ought to integrate? I'm only using it as a simplistic example, but there's a flow of information going up to us on things that we might not have reached, or one of our community members isn't really aware of, but the day-to-day operations have uncovered this. And so keep in mind that this is a joint effort as we're going forward. It's not just we're going to generate just a top down. And ultimately, we're going to make some decisions, but we want to make sure that we have involved people that do some things every day, just to be sure we understand it. And, we had a session a year or so ago where all the members of the leadership team went around and discussed with the GM all the things that they thought they had as agenda items, and the board had a chance just to listen to that. That was helpful, get a different perspective, make sure we understand it. So I just want to reinforce that point.
oh, absolutely, Wayne. That's a good point. There should be a top-down, bottoms-up approach that, it also flows down. There could be arrows, flowing back up that, the department head goals are supportive of the management goals, which in turn should support the management goals more support the strategic objectives than the board goals. But the importance of doing this now is that, for example, if we set a goal of reviewing, revising, and clarifying the governing documents, that might involve some considerable legal expense. So as Scott and his team are developing their budgets, they need to be aware that this is something that the board wants to accomplish, and it needs to be in the administrative budget to support that. And likewise with some of these other goals.
Regis, I'll comment. The process looks very reasonable, something we could do. A couple of specific goals that I'd like to have us consider when we talk in more detail are to optimize the value that we're getting from the BJL agreement. And another one is to enhance mutually beneficial relations beyond the POA. For example, the Wellness Collaborative does a lot of very good things, particularly related to the health and of our community. There's a possibility that we can work with them to achieve some of their goals and some of the things we're trying to do more cost effectively. To deal with some of the counties. For example, there's a SPLOST initiative in the county happening right now that will be voted on in March. We in District 1 of Dawson County have not gotten our fair share of those funds. Like to work with them to get them to agree that they put in some things that are helpful to us. So those are a couple of extra board goals that I think are important for next year.
I had just a couple of thoughts too, Regis. If I wanted to present to the board, which was, it's based on some feedback that we've received recently from residents here, which was a living strategic plan that's updated annually, just as we work through the master plan and update it accordingly. We could do so with, as you've laid out on your chart, we could do so with like a living strategic plan with measurable goals that we can judge our performance by. And as I said, we can update those annually. One thing that crossed my mind when you had asked about the suggestions was, as we work through our projects that we have listed in short term, I think it would be wise to pay a bit more attention to ADA compliance. I've noticed quite a bit just in the very well-used areas like the clubhouse and things like that. We're not compliant, and I think that that's something that needs to be seriously addressed. Then I offered what I gave you was also a suggestion for the governance committee and the way it could be made up and how we can undertake that project, because I think it's worthwhile.
Okay. Candy, I guess Phil isn't here. Candy, do you have any questions or input, not or questions or comments?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I think we need to make sure we're working with strategic items versus operational, because I think that's where we've gotten confused or goals mixed up in the past. Personally, I have a very strong alliance to the master plan, working through the research on the CCF, the capital contribution fee. And I think there's a lot of work to be done and I think you highlighted it in looking at the master plan and the steps that need to be taken, working with the long range planning committee. And as we take projects on, we're really a city. So looking at a capital improvement plan, the steps that we need to take to make sure that I think Scott did a good job early on outlining those, from looking at getting 3 bids to getting budgets established and so forth. So I think we're on a learning curve to learn how to put a process in place that makes sense and have the community be confident in that process as we move forward through presenting the master plan items to the community.
Yeah, and you make a good point about the strategic goals versus the management or operational goals. As far as the operational goals are concerned, it would be something that we would certainly, just as we provide budget guidance, we would need to provide Scott some ideas on some of the things he might consider, and, but they're Scott's goals, and he would need, for example, ADA compliance. That's, I would think, a typical example of that, and then Scott would say, yeah, we'll take that on as one of our management goals for the year. I mean, the thing about this is, as far as these goals are concerned, I was always taught, 3 to 5, you don't want to have a laundry list of goals. But these need to be important goals. They can't be, daily, like meet my budget. I mean, that's not a goal, that's a given, you do that. So they've got to be important, not necessarily part of day-to-day operations, but they're 3 to 5. And then they've got to be SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable. I can't remember what R and T are, but in any event. Okay, well, I think that we've accomplished what we wanted to do, is just teeing off this process, or teeing up this process, and we will have to schedule a meeting down the road to get into this in more detail. And Scott, where are you at as far as, again, I'm not sure what the EOS, Bobby Jones EOS or EOS, or pronounce it, if, there's a goal setting.
Actually, it's a couple of things. First of all, having done this process in corporate America, I just want to put a plug in for your slide here. This is a fabulous process if done right. I mean, because everything starts with your vision and strategic objectives, and eventually that gives me a set of things to deploy to my department heads that we should be able to trace back to every one of those yellow squares. So it's an awesome process. EOS, it's really called Entrepreneurial Operating System, and all it really is a set of tools and how we will run our organization to accomplish the goals that we all agree on. When we come up with the department head goals, to make sure that to increase the probability that those things will happen, and that we have effective staff meetings, and we have effective tracking in place, and we don't wait, until the day before something is due to say, oh my gosh, we hadn't even thought about ADA compliance yet. EOS basically gives us a set of tools to manage to those goals. So it's nothing at all that conflicts with what you've got here. The other thought I had too is what also might help the board a little bit is if you think about each of those yellow boxes, if you're trying to find 3 to 5 things, it's good to kind of think through, like, what would a board goal look like that would help us become the employer of choice? What would a board goal look like that would help preserve the character of Big Canoe? It's great if you can tie those back to one of those yellow boxes. Yeah,
they absolutely have to be.
Right.
And for example, Bob's idea of the SPLOST funds.
Yep.
That certainly would support prudent stewards, and it would certainly.
Exactly.
These strategic objectives are okay, but to enhance the reputation of Big Canoe, I think that needs to be tweaked a little bit.
Yeah.
I would like to see that, enhance the property owner experience or something like that. But in any event,
Right.
it would, the SPLOST, if we were to be the recipient of SPLOST money, we could certainly use it to enhance the reputation or the property owner experience. So yeah, absolutely. And any goal the board comes up with, and any goal you and your team come up with, have to support one of these, one or more of the strategic objectives.
Right. Perfect.
Okay, well, we are now 55 minutes into the meeting, and I'm doing a very poor job of keeping us on schedule, so we'll hopefully move through the next items pretty quickly. The next item on the agenda is electronic voting. Bob, do you want to talk to that, or do you want me to talk through that?
Let me give it a quick shot, Reg, and you can add whatever. Regis actually came up with the idea when we had 2 candidates and 2 openings to say, how do we save money here? And electronic voting looked like a possibility. So we're exploring that. We've got an initial opinion from legal that there are no state regulations that prohibit this and that we can do this within the governing documents of Big Canoe. That's an initial. Bob Mackey, the chair of the election committee, has put together a small group to investigate the mechanics of several companies who actually assist in enabling the process. That's where we are now when we get back. And if he reports that there are substantial savings that can be attained by doing electronic voting, we'll go back and get a final legal opinion. And there are some things that you have to do A, B, C, and D and make sure that we can do those. And that's about where we are today.
Okay, good summary. The only thing I would add or actually correct is this was not my idea. This was Jane Hagan, our Chief Financial Officer's suggestion. I think it's a great example of our employees looking for ways to reduce cost without impacting the property owner experience. So shout out to Jane, and I merely picked up on her idea, and hopefully we'll see this through to fruition. Okay, the next item on the agenda is, any questions from the board? Okay, if not, the AECC charter. Lou, this
Yes.
is your baby. You want to talk to this?
Yes, it's just a brief overview. What the committee has decided to do is really more closely align it with the other GM and POA committees. I think previously they didn't have term limits and such, and now they're aligned with the 2 term limits for 3 years. They also used to have a developer representative that was specifically noted in their requirement for membership, as far as members that they wanted online, and that has been done away with. And then they've just given you some very good information as far as the procedures, the information that they keep, and then the ways to go about acquiring this information if you want to request it.
Okay, so are we voting on adapting this charter in this meeting?
I would recommend approval of this because, as I said, it coincides with the committee charters for both under the GM and the board.
Okay, so there is a motion to approve the charter. Is that motion seconded? Or is there?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Okay, any discussion other than what Lou has already elaborated on? Okay, I guess we will bring this to a vote then. All in favor of approving the charter? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Let the record show the charter has been approved unanimously.
Regis, let me make a process comment that Lou, can you talk with Debbie and get a unanimous consent form? We need to sign, all of us need to sign that, and it will then be included in the board documentation.
Of course, and I think by Debbie being observant, she'll know that we can move forward on that. I'll do it.
Okay. Just noticed I've been sharing still sharing my document. I apologize for that. Okay, the next, speaking of charters, the next item on the agenda is the task force charter for the Big Canoe's 50th anniversary jubilee. I believe, Scott, this was something that you would like to talk to.
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, a shout out to Leadership Big Canoe. They're finally graduating. The class of 2020 is finally graduating tomorrow. And it's not the normal, really nice, big, fun graduation that we normally do, but everybody will be presenting their projects to myself and a subset of the board. So this was one of the project teams from the class of 2020. Pretty exciting. We are within 2 years of having our 50th anniversary at Big Canoe, which is pretty hard to imagine, but October of 2022 is the big date. The project team has recommended that a task force be established, and that's what this charter is. And this would be basically the steering committee for the next 2 years that would report to the general manager. And the goal is to synchronize all the different activities across both the social committee, which is really Terry's property owner event committee, as well as marketing efforts, as well as tying in all of our different clubs and activities that we normally have in the course of a year, as well as maybe establishing some external relationships that we might want to, have the governor come and speak at Big Canoe on our 50th anniversary. So things like that. This would be the steering committee. If anyone's ever done like a major church fundraising kind of thing or a nonprofit gala, think of the person who chairs this task force as being the person who would be the head of that gala. It's a big job because they're obviously going to be coordinating many subcommittees and making sure everybody stays rowing in the same direction. There would be a small budget assigned to them in 2021, a bigger budget for marketing and events and things assigned in 2022. And we're really asking the board's approval to go ahead and establish this committee, at which point we will go ahead and start looking with some help from Leadership Big Canoe on who would actually chair the Jubilee Committee for probably a period of 2 years, and then we'll start to staff that team. So I'm not really looking for a vote today. I assumed we would do that next week at the actual board meeting, but wanted to get this in front of you and give you some time to digest it and also ask any questions you might have.
Any questions from the board?
Scott, one of the things that we've talked about briefly, because I sat through all the earlier meetings with the 50th anniversary. I know we need an active board that's going to take care of all the ins and outs, but there might be some value in having an executive advisory board that helps make all these contacts. We have some unique talent here in Big Canoe that have the capability to call people, the governor, others directly and say, look, we'd like a little bit of consideration. And they would just be an adjunct to the supporting this committee. So give that some thought.
Yep, I saw that as, either a subcommittee under this or something, external outreach team, something of that nature that I think there's definitely some great opportunities to bring in some interesting folks. Maybe both from a monetary standpoint, but also from clearly just a support, speaking, celebration standpoint as well.
And Scott, I just have a clarification or re-understanding of my understanding. The relationship with the Programs and Events Committee, I understand they're going to be working in concert. Somebody on the committee, the Programs and Event Committee, expressed concern that they hadn't been communicated with to understand the proper roles of each. If that has not been done by the time we vote on it next week, we make sure that that's clear and everybody understands their role and the 50th anniversary. So.
Yeah, perfect. I'll take that action. Clearly, this would be the task force we're talking about is the overall steering committee. Programs and events would be tied into that and they would sort of like, again, if you were doing a gala, there would be a social subcommittee. Think of the P&E committee as being the social committee. And then there would also be external outreach. There would also be marketing. There would also be clubs and engagement, internal engagement. that kind of thing. So, but we'll leave that up to the chair, but I will talk to Terry and her committee chair and just let them know this is not in any way taking over any of their responsibility.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, the next item on the agenda is the Creek 9 rejuvenation. And just wanted to bring the board and those in the community property owners that are listening in or will be watching this. We are all aware that last Friday, the board unanimously approved a motion to move forward with the vote to approve $2.33 million to fund the renovation or rejuvenation of the Creek 9 golf course. So the informational campaign has started. We had a meeting, a Zoom meeting yesterday, where we presented a short video as well as a PowerPoint presentation, which went through all of the reasons that we felt that this project deserved property owner support. It was, I believe the presentation was fairly well received, and we have gotten about, as I understand it, there's been about 300 viewers of that. Certainly would like to encourage all property owners to go out and view that the recording that is available on our website. It is something that it is a lot of money. It's a lot of there's a number of complex issues involved. We know that there will be a lot of questions. Please ask the questions. There has been a website established. The Creek9.org, creek9.org is a website established independent of the POA website that we will be receiving questions and trying to respond to them. And we will probably, I think maybe last month, we talked about having community coffees, reinstituting that tradition again. And I would like to suggest that we do have one to talk again for the community to have an opportunity to get more information on the Creek 9 initiative. Ballots will go out in September, and we hope to have a decision by the end of September and move forward in October.
Could I just add something?
Certainly.
I just wanted to impress on property owners who might not have tuned in last night that going forward with this project does not equate to any dues assessments increases, no special assessments, no additional burden on the property owners. The money is already in the board designated capital account. Almost all of it right now, definitely will be by the end of the year. And that doesn't encroach on the restricted capital reserve account that we have set aside potentially for roads, bridges, dams, other emergencies. Are two different sets of funds. Just can't say it too many times.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Amy. Any other questions from the board? Okay, we will move on to the Northside Hospital update. Wayne, I believe this is something that you will speak to this topic.
So briefly, the board felt it was important to stay actively engaged in understanding all the latest medical trends impacting COVID-19 and the actions we were taking. We coordinated with Northside. In this case, the representative came from Foresight. We were very fortunate that Dr. Douglas Arlen Olson was the individual who spoke to myself and Bob and Lou in this particular case, and was very insightful. He's a graduate of Loma Linda University School of Medicine. He did his internships in residency at the University of Georgia. We wanted to just highlight a couple of things, but a couple of things that are important for for his background and credibility. He's the head of the Department for Cephas and COVID for all the Northside hospitals in Georgia. So he's been in that job since 2018. He's really an expert on emergency medicine. Now, one of the things that's really interesting, he's also the director for Phoenix Air Group that's in Cartersville. Now, they're the only company in the world to transport patients with highly infectious diseases in an ICD environment. So they're the ones that went into Wuhan and brought the 600 Americans out. They're the ones that went into Africa and brought out people from America that during the Ebola crisis. So he's incredibly experienced in understanding diseases. And so cut to the chase, we talked about what do you continue to recommend? Obviously, he felt social distancing was critical. We ought to do that as much as we could. Hand hygiene was still very important, particularly if you're not washing your hands and you touch your face. That's the easiest way to touch something or to greet with somebody, and that would impact the potential to do that. Now, from a PPE standpoint, he believed both in masks and goggles. Now, he said, look, you can't be a surgeon and go into an operating room without, particularly if it has infectious diseases where you don't have some goggles. So we talked about that a little bit. And so just to make his point, I said, well, what's the easiest way for just a citizen? He said, well, these are my goggles that I use for shooting. He says he wears shooting goggles. They cover your face easily. They're not worried about the mask. It's all about not touching your eyes and the glands around it. That was his point. We didn't try to get cross-examine it. We just listened. One of the things that Northside does is everything goes into single patient rooms. Now, I guess one of the reasons I'm doing that is I just went through a surgery in Northside. So they did a COVID test on me, which was negative. Their incredible security of going through and getting into the hospital. The other point was recognize that, particularly in the case of Northside, they have very solid procedures for doing this. He just reminded us that, yes, there's varying opinions on this, but he felt strongly, given his expertise in emergency medicine, that pursue as much social distance, hand hygiene, wearing a mask, particularly in public, as you could. Now, I did know one other little piece of statistics so that I can maybe put it in context for us. The first COVID case in Georgia was in March of 2020. A 67-year-old gentleman died. Since then, we've had 219,000 confirmed cases with about 4,229 deaths. I want to just take Dawson and Pickens County. We've experienced 768 cases with 8 deaths. That's pretty good. We are not the center or epicenter of the state. The other thing, though, is that individual age groups from 50 to 79 in the state of Georgia account for 2,298 deaths. So we're in age groups that fall into that category. And if you have previous other medical concerns, he says that's important to understand. One last thing, because a lot of us are grandparents. Georgia's done a testing on about 7 and gotten positive results between 1-year-old and 17-year-olds of 17,086, but with only 2 deaths. The point he made to us is don't forget these kids are carriers. And you need to be as thoughtful about that as the fact they're probably not as vulnerable. The deaths really occurred in, I believe, ages 13 to 17 in the 2 that happened. And it appeared that there were some other things. So I think the message from the board is we're continuing to carefully talk to the experts, examine what's going on. I have a lot of confidence in the 2, Northside and Canton and Forsyth, and having just gone through Forsyth, I can tell you that I think they're doing a first-class operation. So that's just an information sharing, and thanks for the opportunity to let us share that with the community.
Okay, thank you very much, Wayne. Excellent report, some good stuff there. Any questions from the board?
Wait,
Mr. Crawford?
I'd like to emphasize something that Dr. Olson talked about very strongly. He wanted to get the message out to the community that don't be afraid to get medical assistance at Northside Hospital with all of the mitigating factors that they have taken. They have been strongly in this since at least January, maybe before that even. So if you need to have a medical thing, that's one of the things he's noticed is people are putting that off and they shouldn't do that. That's bad for their health.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, well, let's move on to the next item, which is the proposed rules and regulations, which I believe is, we're scheduled for the final reading and vote on these rules and regulations.
That is correct, Regis.
Okay, okay, Jason, you want to talk to these?
Sure. The final vote would be next week at the board's the August voting session to adopt these proposed changes. All of the numerical discrepancies have been corrected. There have been no substantive changes, either in the summary sheet or the draft of the proposed rule changes. They both align, and we'll be asking for board vote next week to approve these proposed changes.
Any questions from the board?
Just confirmation, Jason, no other property owner comments in the month that we delayed. We actually had the second reading and we had one little thing that we wanted to make sure that they were aware of. Has there been any other comments?
None to my knowledge, Bob. Everything's been relatively quiet regarding the rules and regulations, the proposed changes.
Okay, thank you.
Now, Jason, early on, we had a couple of property owner comments. One of them, which I'm quite sure that we've addressed, was the fact that one of the proposed rules was in conflict with one of our governing documents, and I believe that conflict has been resolved. I think another thing, there was something else that the list of rules and regulations was not complete. There was more than had been identified on the website. Again, forgive me if I'm not completely up to speed on these, but if you could address that issue as well.
I'm not aware of the second or the latter, Regis. I do know that the potential or the possible discrepancy was the 30 days delinquent voting rights, membership rights.
Yep.
That has been corrected. I'm not aware of an incomplete rule and regulation
Jason, I
proposal.
believe what Regis is talking about there was there was a typo in the written rules and regulations that was correct on the website, and that's been corrected. That's why we delayed it a month.
Okay.
So I think we're good to
Yes,
go.
sir. Yes, sir. Okay, that's right.
Okay, well, very good. Thank you very much for that, Jason.
Thank you.
And I think the next item on the agenda, we said we would talk to procedure 107.5 if time permitted. But in that we're already an hour and 20 minutes into an hour meeting, I would suggest that we defer that until next week. If anyone on the board has a strong desire to speak to that tonight, we'll certainly entertain that discussion. Okay, if not, the final item is ask the POA. Candace, any questions for us
Yeah.
this month?
Well, we've got, with the new implementation of Ask the Board online, I wanted to really give a detailed recap next week with some FAQs. But basically, there's been about over 400 emails, a combination of emails, and then using the portal on our website to ask questions or raise concerns over the last almost 30 days. The system that we are using is quite, it really provides us a lot of good information. For instance, when an email or entry comes in through the portal to ask a question and they select which department they think the question should go to, the reply time has usually been within about a day or so from the receipt by the appropriate department head, and the resolution has been somewhere around 4 days. So I think it's working. Now, Justin told me today, who's the one that was involved in implementing this for the POA, that about 75% of the questions coming in are coming in through email. So that means that still quite a few people are not taking advantage of the of our portal, where they can provide a little bit more detailed information, and the subject matter can be defined better as it moves through the assigning the task to department heads and so forth. So next week I will have something posted, as well as covering more what in fact are the frequently asked questions and answers that we've received over the last month. Many of them are coming from public, going to public works, probably at least 25 to 30% of them.
Very good. Any questions from the board? Thank you very much, Candy. And I guess with that, we have completed the agenda that was laid out for us this afternoon or evening. And I will entertain a movement to adjourn.
So moved.
May second?
Second.
Good job, Regis.
Anyone? Thank you. Any, we'll vote for on the adjournment. Any, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we are adjourned, and now we go into the question and answer time with the board. Tim, are there any questions for us?
You've made some wonderful presentations. The audience is pleased, and there are no questions for you tonight.
That's scary, Tim.
Were there any viewers tonight?
We had probably about 50.
Okay. Well, very good then, Tim. Thank you. And of course, there are opportunities for property owners. There's other vehicles for property owners to ask questions. So thank you all very much. And we will be certainly in touch. Thank you.
Thanks, Regis.